Chapter 69. The thick fog shook violently, and the rain rolled back. Under the chain of fire formed by the bullets, everything was easily torn apart. Then, the thin figure in the rain was engulfed by the fire. In an instant, it was riddled with holes. A gust of wind blew and swept it into the sky, floating in the rain. Only pieces of the raincoat were left, falling to the ground. But the figure was nowhere to be seen. It was as if the figure was a phantom transformed by a ghost, disappearing after a gust of wind. Where is he? The mercenary operating the machine gun had a cigarette in his mouth and looked around in shock. In the passenger seat, the middle-aged soldier who put down the phone pushed the sunglasses on the bridge of his nose. Be careful, it might be some kind of invisible soul. Everyone put on infrared night vision goggles and keep a distance to surround him. Force him to jump out. A response came from the walkie-talkie. Behind the armored vehicle, a few burly soldiers wearing night vision goggles jumped down. They held weapons and skillfully spread out in all directions, slowly approaching. In an instant, a black object was thrown out from behind the concrete isolation pier on the overpass. It drew an arc in the air and fell in the direction of the armored vehicle, a fragmentation grenade. What the F*CK is a fragmentation grenade. Is it a sublimator or a regular army? Fire in the hole. The moment the teammates' reminder sounded, the huge off-road vehicle began to reverse rapidly, but it was too late. The grenade exploded in midair. At the last moment, the entire off-road vehicle was turned sideways by the driver's crazy turn. Then, flames and air waves burst forth. Countless fragments smashed on the bulletproof armor on the side of the vehicle, and the sound of glass shattering could be heard. But before they could react, at the moment of the explosion, a figure suddenly jumped out from behind the isolation pier and ran toward the closest team member. The speed was unbelievably fast. It seemed to be floating in the wind. After the high-speed development was about to end, the body that Crow adjusted to be a perceptive type instantly exploded with astonishing speed. The black shadow stuck close to the ground, pulling the fog and rain curtain with it, rushing toward them. The well-trained team member did not hesitate and pulled the trigger in an instant, but as if he had expected it. The shadow made a strange turn in the air, almost like a circus, and flew along the trajectory of the bullet. While jumping, the figure's feet drifted across the puddle of water on the ground, creating a soul-stirring splash. Without waiting for the water to fall to the ground, that young and tender face was already very close. In the next moment, they passed by each other, and blood spurted out from the mercenary's neck. The thin figure dodged behind him, pulled his shoulder, and turned around as if he was controlling a puppet. He pointed the gun in his hand in the direction of his teammate, and then gently pressed on the inside of his elbow. It was precisely controlled, like a knee-jerk reflex. The pulling of the fascia caused his index finger to subconsciously contract. Before the enemy's body fell to the ground, the barrel of the gun spewed out lethal, poisonous fire. Firepower swept across. The mercenary who had his throat slit provided Huaisher with a temporary shelter. Amidst the chaotic firing of the enemy, Huaisher carried the corpse that was gradually losing its temperature and ran for cover behind another wall. Then he threw out a fragmented grenade and listened to the sounds of the enemy's frantic movements. He skillfully pulled out the magazine from the corpse and compared the caliber of the bullets. It could be used. What good luck! The dangerous attack seemed to have been effective. The enemy did not dare to surround him anymore. They could only continuously suppress him with fire, forcing him to hide behind the isolation pier and unable to poke his head out. In order to prevent them from throwing a few grenades at him, Huaisher could only try to shoot back blindly. Then, he nervously fumbled around in his pocket. He could not find where the item was. It should have been in the inner pocket of his jacket. until he remembered the travel bag he had thrown on the ground, and then he regretfully slapped his head. This was stupid. At this moment, the rain was getting thicker. Without the raincoat, the rain continued to soak into the collar and soles of his shoes. It was very uncomfortable. Just as Weischer was hesitating whether to take another gamble and see if the bicycle could turn into a motorcycle, he heard the horn from the armored Hummer. "Are you still alive, kid?" A hoarse voice asked. Weischer was amused. "Guess. Seems like you're still alive." The person who shouted was not angry. He just straightforwardly said, "You did a good job. No, I should say, it's the first time I've seen someone perform so well." "How old are you? 16? 17? Are you an adult?" "No, right? To be honest, I don't really want to kill a kid." "Listen, kid, we still have 9 people on our side, fully armed. You have no chance of winning. Raise your gun and obediently come out from there. How about it?" "I have a question." Weischer suddenly spoke. "Ask away." The person who shouted smiled. The conversation was useful. No matter what happened next, they would be able to take the initiative. If they were lucky, they could take down the kid without bloodshed. "Where are you from?" Weischer leaned back against the wall, lowered his head, and pulled the bolt. He asked loudly, "Rome? America? Or the Russian Federation?" Without waiting for the person who shouted to answer, he said, "Listening to your cowardly tone, you must be an American, right? You know shame? Shame." Incidentally, he also used the Latin words he learned from the Red Glove's memory to curse. The effect of the taunt doubled. The predecessor of the American community was the many free city-states established by the immigrants of Rome, the local Aztecs, and the Indians before the division of Rome. Although when Rome and the Russian Federation competed for Western hegemony, they found the opportunity to rebel, but they also suffered terrible revenge from Rome. At the end of World War I, they were beaten by Rome. They could only rely on the pressure exerted by the Russian Federation on the Eastern Front to survive until the end of the war. The combat power of the Americans had completely become a joke. They were laughed at by the Romans for more than 200 years. Until today, when you walked into any bar in Rome, you could hear people telling classic American stories. The classic jokes were undying, and new ones were constantly being introduced. It could be said that it was the source of joy for the Roman people. Now, it was used on these free fighters cultivated by the American community. The effect was simply outstanding. Weischer could almost imagine how ugly the expression of the person who shouted was. In the carriage, there was dead silence. "Can you lock on?" After receiving a confirmation from the sniper on the other side, the commander with a pale face finally said goodbye to Weischer. "Unfortunately, child, you chose a dead end." Weischer was amused. He wiped the rain off his face and raised his gun. "Do you know, my best result a few days ago was to wipe out an elite team. It took me 2 minutes and 18 seconds. He listened to the long-awaited thunder in the distance and whispered softly, "I guess it will be even shorter this time." In that instant, lightning shot down from the heavens after the delay, and the roar of thunder. It illuminated his face. Therefore, the sniper squatting on the roof of the building in the distance saw the smile on his face. He also saw the middle finger raised to him. Then something fell from the sky and landed beside him. The oval-shaped iron object bounced and rolled in the pool of water, making a gurgling sound. The sniper raised his head in shock and looked at the black bird's trajectory as it disappeared into the distance. "FUXK." He closed his eyes. Boom! Flames rose from the top of the building and illuminated the commander's stunned eyes. In the loud noise caused by the fireworks, Weischer, who was behind the isolation pier, had already shot out along with the gradually intense drumming in the headphones. With the roar of the heavy metal band, the young man let out a hoarse whisper in the whistling wind. I am Iron Man. When the mercenaries turned their muzzles and aimed at the youth's shadow again, he had already returned to his travel bag, as he wished. He smiled at them one last time. I really hope you brought gas masks. The young man aimed his pistol at the travel bag at his feet and pulled the trigger. The bullet instantly tore through the plastic bag, and countless grayish-black dust flew up. Then, a grayish-white flame ignited in his hand. It was like a dust explosion. The darkness formed by the ashes of the calamity swallowed everything. Then, tragic cries of grief and roars of fear rang out. At the last moment, when they were swallowed by fear and despair, they saw a pair of red eyes. When the darkness gradually dissipated, the commander who shouted was curled up in a chair and crying like an abandoned little boy. Then, he saw the young man leaning against the car door. As if there was an invisible gravitational force, the darkness formed by the calamity ash was pulled into his body. Like a monster, he was devouring the solidified fear, despair, and death. Huaisher lowered his head and casually inserted the art-like sacrificial knife into his vest. He focused on loading the pistol's magazine, one by one, so carefully. To be honest, you are not elite at all, let alone professional. Outside the broken window, the young man loaded the pistol. He slowly raised the weapon in his hand and showed the dark barrel to the last enemy. At best, you are just a bunch of war dogs. The trigger was pulled. Bang! Everything returned to silence. In the endless rain falling from the sky, he turned his head and stared in the direction behind him. He waited quietly. In the dead-silent car, Luo quietly stared at the young man waiting in the rain. Chi Wen's expression changed as he tried to suppress the panic and anger in his heart. What is he doing? Waiting for me. Luo sighed softly. He knows I am here. As he spoke, he pulled out the pistol from his chest and handed it to Chi Wen. Boss, if you are unlucky, you may have to go to Jinling alone. Chi Wen's expression suddenly changed, and he could no longer maintain his calm. You are a gold rank ascendant. Can't you beat him? That brat. Luo shook his head. He is different from the others. He slowly got up, but was caught by Chi Wen again. Don't go. Chi Wen's eyes widened, and his expression twitched. We don't need to fight with this kind of lunatic. This is the Discovery Realm. It won't be long before someone comes. Luo shook his head and couldn't help but laugh. Do I have to run away with my tail between my legs in front of the same brat twice? He stared at the young man in the rain, who looked just like a demon. His eyes slowly narrowed, and his voice was cold. If we don't kill him here, we won't be able to rest easy in the future. As the scales grew, the snake-like face flashed with malevolence. He said, I will be back in a while. As he spoke, he slowly pushed open the car door and walked into the rain. As he walked forward, two thick arms extended from the gap in his coat at the shoulder blades, and two bronze scimitars were drawn from his back. A slender snake, tail stretched out from under his jacket, gently brushing past the puddle of water, leaving behind a trail of poisonous green marks. With the supply of nearly combusting origin substance, the second stage of the complete gold rank stigmata, Naga, was completely activated, turning his body into a 3-meter-long four-armed Naga. As his forehands spread out, the water on the ground seemed to be pulled by an invisible force, solidifying around his body like a rolling curtain. The stigmata Naga, which originated from India, was originally a poisonous dragon and a large snake. After it was passed to Myanmar, the alchemists took the local miracle and mixed it and smelted it, forming the four-armed Naga. It also increased its affinity with water. Naturally, it had an advantage over the sea in rainy and snowy weather and in wet areas. Now, it could be said that he was at his peak. Even though he hadn't reached the third stage and had begun to transform into a legendary creature from the inside out, he still had shocking lethality. Just like that, he stared at the young man in the rain. He grinned, and a sinister smile appeared on his inhuman face. Huaishir slowly pulled out the sacrificial knife. After having its fill of fresh blood, the blade emitted a resplendent light, as if it was a death that could bewitch one's soul. Chapter 71. You're right. Long time no see. Luo strolled in the rain, tilted his head, and stared at the boy not far away. He gestured slightly with one arm at his waist. Last time, when I planted the soulless seed on you, you were only this big. Wait a minute. What did you say? Huaishir raised his hand, took off the earpiece on his right hand, and looked at him in confusion. It was as if he didn't hear him. He was unmoved. It doesn't matter. You probably forgot. Luo strolled, leisurely, unusually talkative. It's actually a good thing if you can't remember clearly. After all, I killed your parents with my own hands. He paused for a moment, tilted his head, and recalled. You might be a little embarrassed if I tell you. It's a little outrageous that you're still begging for mercy when you're about to die. Unexpectedly, the boy was still calm and even nodded slightly. I actually agree with this point, he said. After all, they didn't set any good examples since they were young. Luo's eyes flashed with a hint of surprise, and his footsteps paused for a moment. I know you're trying very hard to make me angry. Unfortunately, what I don't lack the most now is calmness. Huaishir pointed to his head and said softly, So, there's no need to play those little tricks anymore. Just tell me directly. The gorgeous sacrificial knife and the invisible axe collided in the air, bursting with sparks, illuminating the cold face of Luo. How do you want to die? Strong wind and heavy rain blew in his face. The heavy curtain of rain was cut by the sacrificial knife. Huaishir's weight seemed to disappear, blending into the wind. In the blink of an eye, Luo was already close to him, and the knife and axe in his hand were chopping down at his face. Steel collided, and sparks flew. The two crossed each other, but Huaishir's footsteps suddenly stopped. He scooped up a splash from the puddle, turned around, and with the force of the rotation, pressed his weight on the blade, and slashed diagonally. Then the wind whistled, and a long tail covered with scales pierced out from under Hiluo's trench coat. The sharp tail was like a nail drilling into Hiluo's throat and finally flew past his neck. Hiluo's right arm suddenly turned 360 degrees and blocked the sacrificial blade as if it had no joints. Then, the blade on his other arm chopped down. Huaisha tried to dodge, but the corners of his eyes began to twitch wildly. A chill spread through his body, and he suddenly leaned backwards. Then, he saw a huge bullet hole in Hiluo's windbreaker. The shotgun in his hands was already aimed at where he was originally standing through the windbreaker, and he pulled the trigger. The iron rain whistled out. Immediately after, a scar appeared on Hiluo's long tail. It was so deep that bones could be seen. Flesh and blood rolled up and opened to both sides. As he rolled on the ground, Huaisha opened his hand. The formless axe that had been sent flying reappeared in his hand, its origin substance stained with green blood, just like the blood oozing from the wound on his neck. It was poison. Wisps of greenish-black began to spread from the blood vessels on his neck. Together with the blood, they slowly extended to his face, leaving behind a sinister spiderweb pattern. Victory and defeat had been decided. Why didn't I see you use that trick from last time? Hiluo slowly turned around, his lips curling into a cold smile. Otherwise, you wouldn't have lost so quickly. Huaisha felt a slight dizziness in his head. He raised the blade and looked at his face, then nodded in understanding. Is it poison? He licked the poisoned blood and smacked his lips. He nodded and said, the taste is not bad. It closed in on him again. Its speed was inconceivably fast. It was even faster than the previous extreme speed. Hiluo tried to retreat in shock, but the blade was already in front of him. After seeing how evil this blade was, Hiluo didn't dare to let it cut him again. He raised the two scimitars in his hands in an attempt to block the attack, but it was only when the blades collided that he realized how ridiculous his idea was. An unimaginable amount of energy exploded from the blade, piercing straight through like a hot knife through butter. Was this a fucking blade? Or an axe? He raised the shotgun with one hand and tried to aim, while the other pulled the poisonous rain curtain that protected his body and rushed towards Huaisha. However, before the shotgun barrel could be raised, it was gripped tightly by a cold palm and stuck. Huaisha rushed forward, ignoring the poisonous rain as if it was nothing. His speed exploded again. He sped up again. Hiluo roared and swept his long tail, finally forcing Huaisha away. However, a deep gash had been carved into his chest by the sacrificial knife. Even his bones, which were as hard as steel, had been split open. The tragic wound withered in an instant, turning into a stiff charcoal. The powder fell off with a slight touch. Then, the heart poison on the blade suddenly exploded, along with the pain brought by the blade. The double impact of the body and soul suddenly exploded, causing Naga to let out a tragic cry. He waved the weapon in his hand wildly, trying to force back the evil spirit that was eyeing him covetously not far away. The poison had taken effect, no doubt. He was very sure of this, no matter how strong the resistance was. After being infected by Naga's poison, he had to be injected with the serum immediately. Otherwise, it would be difficult to escape death. No, that damn brat should be dying by now. But now, the young man who was like an evil spirit that derived great pleasure from the blood was approaching step by step. The blades in his hands collided with each other, rubbing against each other, emitting a sharp sound from the sparks. A smile finally appeared on his face that was so calm that it could be called empty. Do you miss the last time when you turned into mist? The young man who should have been so weak that he couldn't move sighed softly. But unfortunately, I ate all the stock just now. There's nothing left. It would have been better if you had come earlier. As he spoke, He licked the corner of his mouth. Then, the blade and axe attacked. He Luo roared, trying to get rid of the pain caused by the heart poison. He gathered himself, and his huge body rushed towards Huaishur. The scimitars in his forearms slashed, almost chopping the isolation block on the ground into pieces. But he couldn't cut that drifting ghost. It wasn't just the speed. When Huaishur swung his blade, the power exploded again, almost making him unable to hold the scimitar in his hand. His 5 fingers were numb. The stigmata that was 2 levels above Huaishur didn't bring about a crushing power. Instead, it seemed that they were evenly matched. He Luo was even suppressed by the young man's breathtaking blade skills. Whether it was the perfect fighting skills or the dagger fighting that had reached the pinnacle of ordinary people's imagination, even the elusive axe. It was only now that he realized where the ash that Huaishur had used as a smokescreen had gone. Right in front of his eyes, countless mist ashes rose from Huaishur's body. They danced like flames and swallowed the young man. It was as if he had been ignited with the fire of despair. Those source substances that had been turned into crystals returned to source substances at this moment and merged into his soul, together with endless pain and death. In that instant, He Luo finally understood. Not everyone would be powerless when they were about to die. Some people, the closer they were to death, the stronger they would be. Just as he was in a trance, a thunderous roar burst out from the young man's body. Huaishur moved forward, forcefully resisting the Naga's enormous power, even if the skin on his arm cracked inch by inch. However, after his skin was shattered, the ash fire that coiled around his skin burned even more wildly. When the pain of millions of people gathered in one place, it also brought about the anger of millions of people. Origin substance fluctuations that surpassed the limits of ordinary ascendance burst out from his body like a tidal wave. Huaishur stepped forward, and the blade and axe slashed down. He Luo's left hand was empty, and the scimitar that was covered in cracks completely fell apart. Immediately after, he lost sight of the young man in front of him, and a sharp pain came from his back. The sacrificial blade, with the invisible axe, had already completely cut off the arm that was holding the shotgun. Poisonous blood spurted out, but it couldn't hide the young man's scarlet eyes. It was like a fire that had reached its limit in a furnace, and even the torrential rain in the world couldn't extinguish it. The light was fanatical. The fire is ready. After layers of torrential rain, the crow standing on the tall building whispered softly, "Only by suffering injuries can one not fear pain, and only by knowing death can one control despair. Using this to create a miracle in the abyss, your sacred mark doesn't come from the furnace and fire, but from your body and soul. Only the last key is left. Huaishur." Accompanied by the Naga's sharp roar, the long tail flew into the sky, circled, and landed on the ground, twisting and twitching. But this time, the pain of the heart poison was resisted. The Naga suddenly turned around, and the huge monster brought with it rain, once again displaying its sole ability. A sea of air descended, enveloping its entire body. The air became as viscous as seawater, difficult to break free. The Naga, however, nimbly and freely soared in this sea of air, suddenly reaching out its hand towards Huaishur. The distance was too close. It was almost within reach. Huaishur couldn't dodge in time and felt his shoulder being pinched by an iron clamp. Then, the remaining 3 arms surrounded him like iron hoops. Regardless of the blades and axes that Huaishur slashed on his body, after sealing off all his dodging areas, he was completely captured. The terrifying strength belonging to the alien beast level erupted, shrinking inch by inch. He wanted to completely crush Huaishur in his arms. He could almost hear the wail of Huaishur's bones breaking. But then he felt a sudden sharp pain from the wound on his ribs caused by the sacrificial knife. It was penetrated by a palm, and the 5 fingers flipped his internal organs and suddenly contracted. Then, between the 5 fingers, the invisible axe gathered again, and a torrent of heart poison erupted from the inside out. The sharp pain overlapped, and together with death, it exploded thousands of times, forming a roar that the soul couldn't bear. His arm loosened a little, and Weisher broke free. Luo gritted his teeth, roared, and casually tore off his windbreaker to wrap around the wound on his chest. His 3 arms spread out, and he soared in the sea of air. Rally the flag! For a stigmata that had reached the 2nd stage, they already had the terrifying vitality of some legendary creatures. It was like the former Chi, you could still escape under the concentrated fire of sniper rifles and automatic rifles. Luo lost an arm and a tail. Although he was seriously injured, it wasn't to the extent that he couldn't move. And Weisher was already an arrow at the end of its flight. As long as he put in a little more effort, he could crush him as easily as crushing dry weeds. Then he saw Weisher quickly retreat, with a smile on his face. Just like that, he raised his blood-stained left hand towards him, and the small ring circling around his index finger. There was also a slender bolt on the ring, as if it was pulled out from somewhere. At the last moment, Luo lowered his head in shock and looked at the wound. Through the sharp pain, he finally felt the iron that was stuffed there and the terrifying temperature that was about to erupt. Boom! The poisonous blood exploded together with the flames and internal organs, spreading in all directions like dark green sparks in the air. In the blink of an eye, it melted into the rain. Only broken limbs and broken bones were left falling from the air. Even if the entire upper and lower body had been blown apart, Naga's steel-like bones still didn't fall apart. Luo's body fell from the air and smashed into the burning basket. Although he had lost most of his body and all of his arms, and his internal organs were burned into charcoal, it was incredible that he was still alive, on the verge of death. Under the washing of the torrential rain, the remaining one eye moved with difficulty, unable to stop the loss of vitality. Until now, Weisher finally breathed a sigh of relief. Immediately, he knelt on the ground and almost fainted. The origin flame was completely extinguished. He panted tiredly, feeling the intense pain from his limbs and body. His vision turned dark, and his ears seemed to be buzzing with bees. But he didn't lose consciousness. Even though he was exhausted in the torrential rain, he staggered forward, crushing the turbulent puddles on the ground. Finally, he came in front of Luo and looked down at the ferocious face. He didn't know why, but he suddenly laughed, because he thought of a joke and wanted to tell him. Once upon a time, there was a woodcutter who went to the mountains to chop firewood. The youth suddenly said, when he was crossing the bridge, his axe accidentally fell into the river. But this was his only axe. He was very sad, so he cried and cried just like you. At this time, the river god appeared from the river and asked him kindly. Weisher raised the sacrificial knife and the invisible axe in his hands and placed them on his shoulders. He asked with the river god, "Did you drop this golden axe or the silver one?" She asked, "Did you drop this golden axe or the silver one?" Naga's eyes widened. His lips struggled to open and close, but he couldn't make a sound. "Yes, the woodcutter said the same thing as you." In the silence, Weisher nodded approvingly. Then the river god said, "You are really an honest child. You can have both axes." Thus, the knife and axe crisscrossed on Naga's neck. In the almost roaring sound of steel, the last of the poisonous blood splashed out to both sides. A head covered in scales rolled to the ground, no longer making a sound. That was the end of the story. F*CK, the river god, F*CK, the golden axe, F asterisk CK, the silver axe. F asterisk CK, the woodcutter. F asterisk CK, everything. Those old stories were too long. It was time to end it. Today, Huaisher turned around, crossed the dead viaduct, and walked towards the end of the story in the torrential rain. Chapter 72. Only the roar of the rain could be heard on the quiet viaduct. The endless torrential rain seemed to have separated this place from the mortal world, isolating everything and swallowing the entire world. So this is what you look like. Huaisher opened the door and stared at the old man in the car. He ignored the gun pointed at his face and looked at him seriously. His mottled white hair was meticulous, his expression was dignified, and his suit was well ironed. He was so dignified that he looked like he had just walked down from a podium. You really have a decent face. Huaisher pushed away the slightly trembling gun and sat in the car, dripping wet. He sat opposite Chi-Wen, the rain and blood on his clothes leaving streaks of dirt on the leather sofa. It was good to be rich. He looked around at the exquisite decorations in the spacious car. He looked down at the soft carpet under his feet and the black footprints he had left behind. He smacked his lips and looked up to ask, "Do you have a cigarette?" Chi-Wen did not speak. The veins on the back of his hand holding the gun bulged. He used so much force, but he did not have the courage to pull the trigger. After a long time, the gun fell weakly on his knees. Huaisher finally found several cigars sealed in copper pipes from the hidden compartment of the armrest. They looked unbelievably expensive and smelled like money. "Thank you." After politely thanking him, Huaisher took out a knife and pried open the copper pipe. He cut the head and the butt of the cigar like in the movies, but the cut seemed to be a little too big. The whole cigar was about to fall apart. He was so scared that he quickly squeezed it tightly. After all, a loose cigar would waste a lot of money. He thought about it and took 2 more. He would bring them back for old Lou to try. In the silence, Chi-Wen quietly looked at him, looking poor as he rummaged through the car. Finally, he spoke in a hoarse voice. "Where is he, Luo?" "Dead." Huaisher searched for a lighter in his pocket and told him casually, "Look back at the isolation pier, the one that fell on the ground." Chi-Wen was stunned. His lips opened stiffly, but he did not speak. In the end, he leaned weakly on the chair, his mottled white hair hanging down. It was as if he had collapsed in an instant. Finally, he revealed a trace of weariness in his resentment. Huaisher finally found the lighter. Grasping it in his damp hand, he spat out a flame and lit the tail of the cigar. He took a deep breath and then naturally began to cough violently. It was sucked into his lungs. Soon, he threw the cigar out the window in disdain. It was so troublesome to smoke it, so it was definitely not a good thing. These rich people must have too much money to burn. "Excuse me, please wait a moment." He finally remembered. He waved his hand and began to rummage through his pockets. "Antidote. Antidote. Where is the antidote? Ah, it's here." He found a small bottle in the inner pocket. It was filled with a colorless, viscous liquid that looked like glue. Crow had assured him that the effect would be outstanding, but he still felt that there was something wrong. Huaisher sniffed it suspiciously, but did not smell anything strange. He raised his head and drank it in one gulp. Then he felt a deep, bitter taste explode in his mouth, spreading all the way down, stimulating his throat and esophagus, and finally churning in his stomach. It was like a big hand that kept digging. It extracted all the poisonous fog and pulled it into a ball. Then Huaisher's expression suddenly changed, and he subconsciously covered his mouth. Soon, he bent down and vomited violently. A pile of green blood clots, lunch, and the milk tea he bought on the way. He vomited all of it. It stained Chi-Wen's handmade leather shoes. It was such an eyesore. Tissue, Tissue. Huaisher fumbled for the tissue in a flurry, directly pulled the box over, wiped his face carelessly, and then pulled out 2 pieces to blow his nose. In the end, the ball of paper was thrown out of the window into the silent wind and cold rain. He let out a long breath and finally relaxed. The blood vessels on his face that were dyed dark green gradually returned to their original color, revealing a slightly young and calm face. He looked at Chi, one in front of him. He looked at him carefully. Suddenly, he asked, "Have you eaten?" Chi-Wen raised his eyes and glanced at him as if he was looking at a fool, but he did not speak. "To be honest, I thought you would run away." Huaisher grinned. "It's like a game of hide and seek. You pretend to be a human, and I pretend to be a ghost. You run in front, and I chase from behind. Besides, it's raining. Look, how romantic. You win, Huaisher. Congratulations, you've successfully ruined my career and my life." Opposite him, the old man looked at him with cold eyes and laughed. He slowly raised the gun in his hand. "You can be proud as much as you want. This is the right that the winner has won, but don't think that I will wag my tail and beg for pity." So he arrogantly glanced at him one last time. He put the gun under his chin. He pulled the trigger. In the silence, there was only the sound of rain. The sound of rain outside the car window mixed with the sound of rain inside the car window, and there was no difference. Only a hoarse scream suddenly rang out, full of pain, as if it wanted to pierce Huaisher's eardrums. Chi-Wen's hand fell to the ground, along with his gun. Blood spurted out from the smooth incision on his elbow and flowed down his exquisite suit. Finally, like a meandering stream, it merged into the soft carpet, dyeing it a gradually spreading dark red. "Calm down. I didn't mean to humiliate you, and I didn't want to be so rough." Huaisher corrected him, sincerely. "Actually, I just wanted to see you smile." As he said that, he reached out and pulled Chi-Wen's hair, pulling him up. He looked at the twisted and ferocious face and asked softly, "Tell me, when my home was destroyed, did you smile?" Of course, Chi-Wen did not smile. He glared at Huaisher and panted violently. He spat blood-stained saliva at him and landed on his face. But Huaisher was still calm, as if he could not feel the anger. "Speaking of which, I should congratulate you first," he said. "I remember you said that after the bid opening tomorrow, you would be able to control the route of Penghu. From then on, you would be the master and wouldn't have to be anyone's dog." Huaisher said solemnly, "Congratulations, Mr. Chi. Your dream is about to come true. You F***king. I should have killed you back then. You damn leftover." Chi-Wen glared at him and cursed hoarsely. "Whether it is you or your parents, you are all a bunch of useless trash who can't do anything right. I really should have buried you with them. I should have torn you into pieces." "Why aren't you smiling, Mr. Chi-Wen?" Huaisher asked doubtfully. "Isn't realizing your dream something to be happy about?" Chi-Wen did not say anything else. He just glared at him. His bloodshot eyes were full of viciousness. Huaisher let go of his hand in disappointment. He pulled 2 pieces of tissue and wiped the saliva on his face. "I have always had a goal," he said softly. He pondered and said softly, "I want to live a healthy life. I want to study hard, get into college, become a musician, support my parents who don't treat me well, meet a woman who loves me, marry her, teach our children seriously, live my life respectfully, and die peacefully surrounded by my family. If there's a dream, this is probably my dream." As he said that, he shrugged and spread his hands helplessly. "Look, a cheap second-hand piano, 2 family members who don't love me, an old house. This is all I have. But now, I don't have a family anymore." Rainwater continued to fall from his wet hair, mixing with the blood and turning into a murky red color. It was impossible to wipe it off, leaving a winding trail on his face. Mr. Chi, when Huaisher said, "I have lost my dream. I am very sad." Chi-wen grinned maliciously. He opened his mouth to speak, but then there was a roar from the car. Smoke slowly rose from Huaisher's pistol. The bullet passed through Chi-wen's lips and came out of his face, nailing into the dashboard of the driver's seat. Blood spurted out. "Please don't speak." Huaisher looked up at him and thanked him sincerely. "Thank you for being willing to listen to me for so long. I feel much better now. Now, we should finish what we haven't done." Chi-wen's face twitched. In the young man's hand, the barrel of the gun was slowly raised and aimed at his face. The path to hell was reflected in his trembling eyes. Huaisher pulled the trigger. Bang! There was an awkward sound from the barrel of the gun. There was no more bullets. "Sorry, this is my first time taking revenge. I am not very experienced. Please wait for a moment." Huaisher fumbled for a handful of bullets from his pocket. He tried to take out the magazine in a hurry, but it seemed to be stuck. No matter how hard he pressed the button, he couldn't get it out. Death seemed to be close at hand, but it lingered not far away, quietly enjoying this rare comedy. Among the soft sounds, there was the sound of a cello. Huaisher's phone vibrated. Huaisher didn't answer, but it kept ringing, as if it would persevere until the end of time. Until Huaisher pressed the phone, a little annoyed. "Hello, who is this?" he asked. "If you have something to say it quickly. I am busy here. I am AI Ching." A familiar voice came from the phone. What's the matter?" Huaisher held the phone on his shoulder and focused on dealing with the stuck magazine. "By the way, I would like to ask, speaking of which, how do I change the bullets in this gun that was issued to me? I have been researching it for a long time. I am waiting online. It is quite urgent." AI Ching was silent for a moment, then asked, "Where are you now?" "I am at home. The rain is so heavy. I am very scared and very lonely. I can only hold a gun to keep warm. It sounds gay, but this magazine really can't be opened at all." A sigh came from the phone. "Don't waste your energy. The gun is installed with a safety lock." Her voice became cold. "Also, the surveillance camera told me that you are not at home. Huaisher, you are sitting in front of a dying man on the overpass of the Jinhai Expressway, trying to blow his head off with a bullet." Huaisher was stunned. He subconsciously poked his head out and glanced at the camera not far away. "Sorry, the signal is not very good. What did you say? Listen to me, Huaisher. If you kill him here, you will only be punished. Neither the Astronomy Society nor the Special Affairs Department will allow it. Put down the gun. Believe me, one day this matter will be resolved in a way that will satisfy everyone." "Then will they kill him?" Huaisher asked back. "Shoot him or hang him? Or the electric chair? Or, to be more humane, injection of drugs?" AI Ching did not say anything. "I am only 17 years old, sister. Don't say these things that I don't understand." Huaisher grinned and sighed, helplessly. "If you want to say it, it doesn't matter if you are punished. It doesn't matter if you are locked in prison. But there are some things that must be done. Even if you are struck by lightning, you still have to do it, right?" After a long silence, AI Ching asked softly, "Do you have to do this?" "I have to do this." The young man raised his eyes and looked at Chi-wen, whose expression had changed drastically. He calmly announced, "He must die." The last thing he heard was a sigh. The phone was hung up. Immediately after, Huaisher heard a crisp sound coming from the gun. The clip smoothly slid out and landed in his hand. Huaisher was stunned. After a long time, he shook his head helplessly. "Don't do something that will make you an accomplice, okay?" After a long period of being stunned, he finally sighed and put down the gun unhappily. Congratulations, you've hit the jackpot. Chi-Yun was stunned for a moment before he was overjoyed. However, before his smile could bloom, he saw the surprise that Huai-Shi had given him. There is a new way to die that you have never tried before. In that instant, a pale flame slowly ignited in the young man's raised right hand. In the flame of the source substance, strands of material rose, revealing a metallic gray texture. They intertwined with each other and were intricately woven together, forming a rope as thick as a pinky finger. He screamed and subconsciously wanted to push open the car door and escape. The farther, the better. He ran wildly in the rain with all his might, almost falling to the ground as he moved forward on all fours. However, the rope snaked over like a snake and silently wrapped around his neck. Then it suddenly tightened. At the last moment, he heard the young man's whisper behind him. "Then, before you die, please empathize with my sorrow." Faster, faster, faster. In the passenger seat, Director Fu roared angrily at the driver. "We are the F*King Special Affairs Division. Why should we care about traffic lights? Hurry up!" Under his urging, the rampaging motorcade roared through the city and rushed in the direction of Daga. From afar, they could hear the rumbling of collapsing buildings, as well as the loud sound of explosions and gunshots. F***CK, the Astronomy Club. I should have F***King killed. That little B** starred back then. Director Fu's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. What was this? How was this a F***King explosion? This was an endless list of reports and reflections. It was over. Not only was there no hope for a promotion, it was already a miracle that he did not get an internal report. Right now, he couldn't help but want to call Fu Yi and ask her where she found such a combat classmate. But now it was too late. He could only pray that Chi-Yun's men could hold out a little longer and not be killed by Huai-Shi. If that happened, it would all be over. Holding onto the warmth in his heart, he hurried along the way. When he finally reached Daga, his heart was completely cold. F***King hell. Why? Anyone with eyes could see the young man sitting on Daga's fracture. He sat quietly in the rain and wind, his head lowered as he stared at the gradually clearing sky and sunset in the distance. Beside him was a dangling rope. There was also an old corpse swaying in the rain and wind. As if tortured, his body was twisted into a strange shape, spasming until he died. His mottled white hair was soaked, covering the distorted face of suffocation. And just under the open lapel of his suit, someone had written an epitaph for him with blood on the white shirt of the deceased. Chapter 73. Huai-Shi opened his eyes and saw the snow-white ceiling, the steel bars, the 4 drip beside him, and the steel tracking ring on his leg. It was obvious that he was lying in prison. To be precise, he was in the detention room of the Special Affairs Department. There were no guns or cannons aimed at him, and there was no restriction on his sole ability. No, Director Fu should be eager for him to secretly escape from prison, right? That way, he could shoot him to death for 5 minutes to his heart's content. He slowly moved his arms and legs, feeling his body's weakness and hunger. How long have I slept? 2 days. Outside the cage, the girl sitting in a wheelchair and reading a book answered without raising her head. Oh, Huai-Shi nodded slowly, yawned, and propped himself up from the bed. After a long sleep, he finally woke up feeling an indescribable fatigue and sleepiness. He was drowsy. Just as he was gradually waking up, he heard a scream coming from the cell next door. "Let me out! Let me out! I'm innocent. I don't know anything." He was stunned for a moment, then looked curiously at the wall next to him. Who's next door? Chi-Yun's son, Chi-Yuan. A piece of trash who was scared out of his wits after finding out his father was dead. With just a little bit of trickery, he confessed everything. Even though Qi Yuan was next to her, Ai Qing's words were not polite at all. She looked deeply at Huai Shi and added, "Thanks to you, although there were some unpleasant episodes in the cleanup of the Qi family, overall, it went very smoothly. No need to thank me." Huai Shi smiled honestly. "This is what I should do. Can you tell which part of my thank you?" Ai Qing asked indifferently. "If you really wanted to be grateful, you wouldn't have put down the gun and killed Qi, when in another way, attacking the staff of the Special Affairs Department, looting the armory, attacking in public, seriously endangering public safety. After killing 16 ordinary people and one ascender, he tortured a suspect who had not yet been convicted, and lynched him to death. Even if his crimes were proven through evidence, it was still a serious violation of the law. Either one of these is enough for you to be locked up in the trench prison until you die. While you're doing these things, you're still an employee of the Astronomical Association. Now, the Jinling office is in an uproar because of you. Do you know how much trouble you've caused me?" Huai Shi was speechless. After a long time, he sighed and lowered his head. "I'm sorry. That's the most sincere apology you've ever given me." Ai Qing praised from the bottom of her heart. She closed the book in her hand and asked mockingly, "Then tell me, what did you get after taking revenge at all costs?" Huai Shi was silent for a long time, scratching his face awkwardly. "I really want to say that I didn't get anything from revenge, but to be honest, I'm really happy." After that, he couldn't help but put his hands together again. "I'm sorry, I accidentally became perverted." He felt like he was perverted. Wouldn't most people feel empty in their hearts after taking their revenge? Why did he feel happy? This wasn't right. You're not perverted, but shouldn't you be happy about revenge? Ai Qing glanced at him. "If it were me, I'd probably laugh until tears came down. Maybe I'd be even more ridiculous than you." Without waiting for Huai Shi to heave a sigh of relief, she continued, "But a fully equipped mercenary team with a Tier 2 sublimator. What a shocking feat. No, it's more accurate to say that it's terrifying. As your unlucky officer, should I be surprised by your skills?" She emphasized the title. "Mr. Huaihai Road, little page." Huai Shi was speechless. He didn't know if he should continue to apologize this time. In the end, he could only shrug. "I know what you want to say, and you don't have to apologize for such a boring thing. After all, we've always been hiding things from each other, haven't we?" Ai Qing paused for a moment, then suddenly said, "However, you should really feel that it's a pity. Chiwen is just a glove that's thrown away after using it, a dog that can't even decide who to bite." Ai Qing took a deep breath and said straightforwardly, "The person who really pushed the Huai family into the fire pit back then should be the current head of the Yin family, my great-grandfather, Yin Xing. In other words, I'm also one of your enemies who destroyed your family." Huai Shi was stunned for a moment and looked at her in shock. After a long time, he nodded slightly. There was no anger or shock on his face. Instead, it was as if he suddenly realized something. "So that's how it is." He scratched his head and finally understood something. Then he widened his eyes in shock. "Wait, so your surname isn't AI? So that's the main point. Don't you feel that it's a pity that you didn't kill me? Then, do you regret not eliminating them completely?" Huai Shi calmly asked. "Although I don't know what happened exactly, you and your great-grandfather are completely different, right? Moreover, I just killed a boss, and you're telling me that there's still a second round. I don't feel that it's real. Why don't we go back and discuss it?" Ai Qing didn't answer, nor did she try to explain anything. After a long silence, she sighed softly. "There's no point in saying anything now. Huai Shi, She slowly shook her head. Originally, with the convenience provided by the Astronomy Association, you could have become stronger, strong enough to settle everything. Now, it seems that I might have made a wrong decision from the beginning. I thought that I could control your fate, but in reality, I can't even control my own fate. Now, it seems that it's time to end this ridiculous delusion. She stopped talking about the previous topic and returned to Why Sure. Chapter 74. After AI Ching left, the crow sneaked out from the corner. Oh, she's finally gone? The crow sighed. I can't stand it anymore. You really broke her heart. Did I? Why Sure was stunned. I don't remember teaching you this kind of scumbag tone. The crow rolled its eyes. Clearly, at this time, if you were a little more gentle and said a little more understanding, you would be able to open up a great line. As she spoke, she suddenly realized something. That's not right. You didn't say that on purpose, did you? Why Sure was silent. It was not because he was afraid that others would find out that he was talking to a crow. Anyway, no matter how they looked, they would see him holding a book in a daze. He just didn't know how to answer this question. After a long time, he said, When I was very young, I understood one thing. The thing that the world doesn't lack the least is cheap recognition and kindness. These things don't have any guarantee of effectiveness. They are the same as unwarranted intimacy. They are all products without any value and meaning. When you don't understand a person's pain and past, how can you make any guarantee for her future? Instead of adding pain and anger in the end, it's better to maintain a respectful distance from the beginning. AI Ching doesn't need my pity and recognition. She is much stronger than other people. If I say something worthless at this time, talk about hot-blooded friendship and victory, it will only make her look down on me. So you're casting a long line to catch a big fish? The crow nodded. I take back what I said just now. You may be killed in the future for playing with a girl's heart. Can't you hope for me a little better? What's with casting a long line to catch a big fish? Why Sure rolled his eyes. Did you come to me to talk nonsense? Isn't this just a coincidence? The crow spread out its wings. Seeing my boy on the verge of friendliness and unfriendliness, the feeling of a rock spreading its wings. How should I put it? It's really complicated. Then did you hear what she said? Yes, the Yin family. Why Sure asked. It might be possible. Crow nodded. So what will you do? Yes, what would I do? Why Sure muttered to himself, but did not answer her question. We'll talk about that later. I'm actually here to inform you. Crow interrupted his train of thought. Although the prison drama was pretty good, it's a pity that your prison life won't last long. They want to shoot me. Why Sure was shocked. No way. Where is the Minor Protection Act? Ascendants are not covered by the protection of minors. Thank you. Crow glanced at the disappointing guy and said, Why are you panicking? It's still too early to shoot you. Then I'm going to be released. Why Sure was overjoyed. No, the purified people are going to do something big. Crow said, Soon, I'm afraid that even if you're in prison, you'll be involved. So be prepared. I'll also finish casting your stigmata before that happens. Something big. Why Sure was stunned. How big is it? Magic City is such a big thing. I can probably understand what you're going to say, but what the hell is Magic City? Why are they all talking about it? Like it's some terrible hell. That's right, it's hell. Crow calmly introduced. Magic City in the 27th level of hell, Metropolis in the 29th level of hell, and Holy City in the 31st level of hell. These three places used to be a big problem for the Astronomy Association. After sealing them at all costs, they exiled them to the deepest part of hell. You can treat them as a literal dark zone, a desperate and terrifying area where humans can't survive. Is it that exaggerated? What if I told you that the place where Exine High was originally located was a megacity with a population of tens of millions, occupying 70 to 80 million square kilometers, known as one of the world's economic centers, the brightest pearl of Dongxia, and one of the most important seaports. What would you think? Then wouldn't my family be awesome? Huaishi's eyes widened. Crow rolled his eyes and ignored him. In the previous era, there was a city like this. It was located at Exine High, but something happened, something that no one wanted to happen. You understand? Huaishi was taken aback. She had a bad feeling about this. And then it became what it is today, and it's gone along with 20 million people. Crow shrugged. Even its name has become a taboo, and you can't even say it out loud. You can only call it Magic City. With that, Crow said, its name is Leifeng. Huaishi could only hear a vague voice. He looked down at the Book of Destiny, but there were only a few asterisks on it. There was an invisible force that removed all information about it from the present world. In the unseen world, all information about Magic City was annihilated. But what does this have to do with the purified people? Next is Sister Crow's exclusive information. Crow smiled mysteriously. What they want to do is nothing more than reopen the road to Magic City. To be more precise, it should be to make Demonic City float up again and appear in this world once more. And the first step to doing this is to tear open a gap in the isolation of the present world to open up a path, and then destroy the world wedge in Exine High or other places to make way for Demonic City. Finally, boom! From a certain perspective, Green Sun and the people of the Pure Ones share the same goal. The beast of the wind disaster that once descended almost uprooted the world wedge at Exine High. Now, do you understand how bad the situation is? That's right, Chingus said as he slowly spread his wings. Doesn't that mean Exine High is finished? Huaishi was shocked. Why are you in such a hurry? Crow rolled his eyes. It's not just Exine High. This thing might completely disrupt the entire coastal area. Do you think you're the only one who can't sit still? Even if the purified people want to fight with the Astronomy Society and the Social Security Bureau, they won't choose a place like Exine High. The people who are stirring up trouble here are at best playing the sidelines to attract attention. The real battle is thousands of miles away. With your level, I'm afraid you won't even be able to go to the battlefield. Don't worry about it. Then why are you telling me this? I'm afraid you'll let your guard down. I just want you to be mentally prepared in case something happens. As she spoke, she raised her wings and patted him on the shoulder. Don't worry. You're my contractor, after all. If anything happens, I'll take you with me. Huaishi rolled her eyes. In any case, eat and sleep when you need to, and that's it, right? That's right, Crow said. The Crow merchant said, when something happens, you can just show your head and kill a few purified citizens. Won't your merit points increase like crazy? Won't it be easy to reduce your sentence? Maybe you'll be released on the spot after you're done. Your tone? Huaishi looked at her from the corner of his eyes. If something really happens, then so be it. But if nothing happens, then don't do anything stupid. Don't worry. Do you think I'm that kind of person? Crow laughed without realizing it and looked elsewhere. There's no need for me to do anything. We're just missing a fuse, aren't we? However, seeing that you're in good condition, I'm relieved. Otherwise, my family would be very worried. Huaishi couldn't help but roll his eyes at her. My whole family is dead. Who would be worried about me? Aya, don't you still have me? If you want to cry, you can always ask me for a hug. Crow started talking nonsense again. After checking his body, as usual, she began to study the new changes in Huaishi's soul ability. Perhaps it was because of Crow's medicine of regret. In the battle a few days ago, in addition to the invisible acts condensed from killing intent and anger, Weischer found that after deliberately stripping away the negative emotions of sadness, he could also condense them into substance through the hand of confinement. The form was a grayish-black rope. It was as thick as a little finger and amazingly flexible. What was even more surprising was that its length seemed to have no limit. It could be stretched until Weischer couldn't support it anymore. Usually, it was about 20 meters long. It could move according to his will, and its speed was about the same as his own. Like the axe of anger, the rope condensed from sadness could make the person who was bound feel one of Weischer's most extreme emotions, and thus lose the ability to resist under the mental impact. It seemed like the soul, hand of confinement, that had been brewed after 7 years of stress had more variations than other simple soul abilities. It wasn't limited to just transforming into an axe. He originally wanted to develop other emotions, but unfortunately, it was in vain. In this regard, Crow's explanation was there was no need to deliberately force it. Once it was accumulated, it would be done naturally. Although the soul was detached from matter, it was still limited by the body of the ascendant. When he reached the second and third stages, the stigmata would strengthen his body to a certain extent, and his ability would have new room for improvement. At that time, it might be a qualitative change. Therefore, there was no need to waste too much effort in pursuing it. It was better to let nature take its course. At the same time, Crow brought another piece of good news. It seemed that his puberty period had officially ended. Under the stimulation of constant fighting and psychological pressure, supplemented by the concentrated potion, she added the original 1 month's time was compressed to about a week. And in the process of the battle with the Nagas, he broke through the final barrier. This was the reason why Weischer found his body so weak after waking up. Not only did he have to repair the internal injuries, but he also had to strengthen the parts that had been repaired. No matter how much saline and glucose he received, it could not solve such a huge deficit. Even if the Special Affairs Department took out alchemy potions to treat him, it was just a drop in the bucket. If not for the fact that Crow had sneaked in and fed him a few doses of the special restorative medicine, Weischer would have died of exhaustion. Wait a minute, how did you feed him? When Weischer heard this, he looked at her suspiciously. He could not see where she had hands. Oh, your question is too rude. Crow became shy. After hesitating for a long time, she said softly, "Of course it's mouth to mouth. Isn't that the fastest way?" Weischer would be a fool if he believed her. After she left, Weischer lay back on the bed, ready to have another fat otaku happy dream. But thinking of her reminder, he did not dare to relax. He quietly took out the Book of Destiny from under the quilt and entered the records. Then, not long after, he appeared on the training ground that had been ravaged by him. He was face to face with the burly iron instructor. He did not know if it was because he had farmed this dungeon too many times in the past 2 days, but when the instructor saw him, he subconsciously took a step back and put on a vigilant posture. "Brother, don't be afraid. We're not going to practice military boxing today." Weischer waved his hand and comforted him. Then, he directly used the authority of the Book of Destiny to create 2 dark green scimitars in his hands. He waved them in front of him and smiled warmly. Chapter 75. It had to be said that Luo, who was also a rank 2 ascended Naga, had a really weak sword technique. Although he had undergone systematic training, when he went out to kill people, he still relied on his extraordinary strength and defensive ability. Occasionally, he would use his soul ability to trick people, but his real skills could only be said to be passable. It looked like it. After going through Crow's dark training camp, Weischer felt that it was simply a mess. In his remaining records, there was nothing useful to write about. In the broken records, there was a lot of killing people and a lot of collecting money. his memory of many combat skills had gradually become blurry and rusty, showing fragmentation. On the other hand, he remembered his anonymous account in the United American Bank very well. Unfortunately, ascenders earned a lot, but they also spent a lot. Just the 4 machetes made by the alchemy workshop cost tens of millions. This kind of cold weapon that could be used in the present. And the border was really worth every penny. To be able to fight so many times with the sacrificial knife, a relic from the border that could cut iron like mud, and only break when Weisher cheated with his soul ability, it could only be said that the quality was excellent. The cost of alchemy potions was even more exaggerated. A tube of silver blood potion, equivalent to a small red bottle, had a market price of 900,000 yuan. Even if the unit price was relatively not too expensive, over a long period of time, it would accumulate to a particularly frightening amount of expenditure. And this thing was just a necessity. If you went out without a red bottle, how would you fight with your head? Not to mention, there was also the existence of the Burmese religion that monopolized the poison dragon's stigmata, the Theravada Tantra. Wanting to buy special custom-made potions and materials for advancement was simply equivalent to sending money to be robbed. Even if he broke the law and made a lot of money by smuggling, he spent it all in the blink of an eye. He only left about 7 million yuan in funds, which was sneered at by Crow. Pauper. Weisher could only think about it in horror. After calculating, what he ate and drank at Crow's place added up to more than a few million yuan, right? He had inquired about it. Although the supplements on the market were relatively cheap, they only referred to those ordinary nutritional products. If it came with special strengthening, one bottle and at least 1 million yuan. Who didn't want a healthy body? Who wouldn't want to lay a good foundation for the future while they were still developing? Now, it seemed that the price she gave him was no longer a friendship price. It was practically a father's price. It was almost as if she was giving it away for free. He had to admit that it was quite satisfying to have such an exaggerated golden thigh to hug from time to time. As for her occasional unreliability and nonsense, sigh, humans always have their strengths and weaknesses, not to mention Crow. In short, after going through Luo's records, in addition to knowing a few materials needed for the Naga's sacred mark formula, the biggest gain was this set of Theravada Tantric dual blade technique. Although the group of Baldies were very aggressive in collecting money, at least they were willing to give it to Luo. They didn't hide anything when they were teaching Luo. Unfortunately, Luo did not have any talent in using dual swords, not to mention that Naga was using 4 swords. The more complicated it was, the more he could only see the basics. The Theravada Tantras were not so considerate that they would pester you to teach you if you were not interested. Anyway, the pass had already said that it was up to you whether you could learn it or not. You find it troublesome to use 4 arms, and the higher level Naga's sacred mark is 6 arms. If you can't learn it, it can only mean that you are not fated to learn it. Don't force it, just recharge it. In the end, it was Weisher who benefited. Dual blade technique was good, so cool. It was just that it was a bit troublesome to use after being beaten by the instructor for the 6th time. Weisher was flustered and exasperated. He waved his hand to call for a rope and directly tied the instructor up to use as a human dummy. Anyway, it could be restarted even if he was chopped to death. You just have to suffer a little first. In the gradual trial and practice, the dual blades in Weisher's hands were also constantly changing. Although it was still in the shape of a scimitar, the center of gravity and arc gradually became the same as the 2 scimitars in Luo's hands. It was not until he gradually understood the mystery that Weisher believed in the existence of 4 and 6 swords. In the end, the core of this set of Theravada Tantric dual blade technique was to move according to the momentum. Whether it was 2 arms, 4 arms, or even 8 arms, it didn't matter. The main point was to find the flaws and fill in the gaps. It was actually a set of underwater combat methods, and the fighting style was as if it was underwater. This was the home field of the Nagas. Since it was a technique that originated from the water, it was naturally impossible to split Mount Hua at the slightest movement. Otherwise, under the resistance of the water, it would only be half the result with twice the effort. What it pursued was a dense and continuous attack, a soft force technique that neutralized and hit, and an extremely deceptive feint. Once it was fully displayed, there would be no gap or breathing room before the enemy died. Once it was defended, it could be said to be airtight. The focus of its attack was not the action of slashing, but the process of pulling the blade back after it was close to the enemy's body. It was like a saw. Now that it was out of the scabbard, the sharp killing intent in the entire room dispersed the cold wind and rain. The condensed death aura followed the blade and slashed at Crow. Then, there was no then. Crow looked up at it, and then it fell on the table in an instant, lost all its power, and wailed. "You've got guts." Crow sneered. "Back then, even Sepetitek didn't dare to be presumptuous in front of me. You're just a shoddy imitation of the Skinner. Where did your courage come from?" He didn't care at all about the tyrannical god that the Aztecs worshipped back then, and gave an arrogant evaluation with disdain. "Well, you refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit, right? Come, let Sister have a good look at you. Is your development normal?" She raised her slender claws and dug out the gemstones that were condensed from origin substance one by one, throwing them into the boiling metal in the crucible. Amidst blades, shrill cries, all the gems were completely stripped. Even the golden patches were torn off, leaving nothing behind. In the end, she even disintegrated the hilt of the blade, leaving only the gray blade making a weeping sound. "Now you agree? Too late." Crow sneered. "A trashy, scheming bitch like you wants to be my little Weischer's stigmata? Dream on. If Sister doesn't tear you apart today, my surname isn't Wu." After ignoring the fact that her surname wasn't Wu, she gently pecked at the blade with her beak, pulling out a shrieking shadow from the blade. She opened her mouth and swallowed it into her stomach. Then she let out a happy burp. Beneath the feathers, a layer of faintly discernible gold also appeared on her current main body, the branches of her body. It was a great supplement. Unfortunately, the amount was still a bit too little. She smacked her lips in pity, flapped her wings, and an invisible force directly threw the blade into the crucible. Compared to the length of the blade, the crucible's depth was surprisingly shallow, but it actually swallowed it all at once. It was hard to imagine whether the blade had melted like butter in that instant, or if it had really fallen into the dark crack that led to somewhere. Then, a boiling sound rang out. The darkness was surging. From the surging darkness, there seemed to be substances slowly gathering. They relied on the metal liquid, slowly condensing, and a bright and clean appearance appeared, with the remains of the sacrificial blade as the main body. After integrating many materials, the miracle of the abyss finally emerged from Crow's cauldron. It revealed its appearance. It was hard to tell whether it was a gorgeous dagger or the key to a treasury door. Jagged teeth gathered on the spine of the blade, and a brilliant golden glow emerged from the teeth that extended out. On its hilt, there was a hexagonal gemstone that was almost pure black. Crow raised her head and glanced at it, saying, "Let there be light." Chapter 76. Today's update is over. Sob, sob, sob. I feel like I'm going to collapse. My neck hurts like hell. Can everyone please subscribe again? If I can break 3,000 subscriptions in 24 hours tomorrow, I'll try again. Life in prison was very comfortable. There was no prison drama as imagined. In fact, there were only 2 or 3 people in the large detention room. Usually, even if they were released, they wouldn't meet each other. Everyone wanted to exchange their experiences in prison escape, but there was no place to start. His friends in the Special Affairs Department also took good care of him. It seemed that after hearing the strange story of him killing a person in 10 steps, they had a strange respect and admiration for him. Moreover, Weischer never put on airs when they met, so most of them were familiar with him. Now that he was in prison, although they couldn't let him go because of their duty, they generally turned a blind eye to anything that wasn't too much. Moreover, Weischer was very cooperative and didn't cause any trouble for everyone. After he got his cello, he found someone to get back his music player from the evidence department. From then on, he lived a fulfilling life of listening to music, waking up early to practice his cello, and practicing his swordsmanship before bed. Looking at it this way, it seemed to be no different from the closed training before the comprehensive exam. He had already left school, but he didn't expect the training life to catch up with him. It could only be said that life was really full of ups and downs, and it was really unpredictable. As a result, on the third day, when he was practicing his cello as usual, he heard an unexpected sound. "Hey, buddy," the isolated prisoner asked, "do you know Rabbuk?" Weischer raised his eyebrows. "You know Rabbuk? How rare." The person next door was amused. "I'm more or less a graduate of the Ivy League in America. How can I not know Rabbuk?" "Okay." Weischer nodded happily. "Which one do you like, the unaccompanied cello suite?" "It doesn't matter which capital it is." The dispirited young man leaned against the wall and whispered softly, "I just want to hear some sound. Anything is fine." Weischer thought for a while, then pushed his hair, which was gradually getting in the way, to the back of his head. He picked up the bow, thought for a moment, and pulled the strings. Bach, unaccompanied cello suite, overture. When Weischer combined piano practice and meditation, his skills and music seemed to have undergone a qualitative change. Not only his own performance ability, but the influence of the music was also frighteningly strong. Soon, a gentle melody flowed out from the strings. The invisible sound spread in the air, filling every inch of this cold cage. As a result, everything seemed to soften. There was no harm. Under the morning sun, dust flew in the air. Everything was as beautiful as a dream. Even the patrolling guard stopped and quietly listened to the sound of the zither behind the cage, not far away. They were immersed in the gentle melody, and the corners of their mouths curled up. 2 minutes passed in the blink of an eye. What followed was a long silence. After a long time, Weischer heard a hoarse sigh coming from next door. "That's great." As if satisfied, the young man said sincerely, "Thank you." Weischer hesitated for a long time before finally asking, "Do you know that I killed your father?" Then he heard Chi Yuan's choking laughter. "You don't have to worry," he said. "I knew that from the first day." "You don't hate him? Would you believe me if I said I don't hate him?" Chi Yuan said, "Don't worry, I hate him more than I hate you." Chi Yuan suddenly laughed. "Do you know what it's like to live in a transparent cage and be treated as a model display from a young age?" Weischer thought for a moment and couldn't help but nod. "It sounds very enviable." "Yes, you don't have to worry about food and clothing, and you don't have to worry about anything, except for the fact that you can't find a place to hide under the flash. It's perfect. Since I was young, even if I made a small mistake, Chi-Wen would look at me with a gaze that said he should have thrown me out on the street like a stray dog." Chi-Yuan sneered. He didn't treat me as his son at all. In his eyes, it was a mistake for me to come into this world. That's not true, right? At first, I just thought he was strict with me. I tried my best to prove my ability to him. That was until he told me that I was my mother's illegitimate child. As if he was telling someone else's story, Chi Yuan's tone was almost cold. He was afraid that others would laugh at him for being cuckolded. After getting rid of my mother, He raised me as if nothing had happened, like raising a dog. Huaisha didn't know what to say, but Qi Yuan seemed to be interested and asked mockingly, "You should have seen the illegitimate child he had outside, right? That he Luo should have been killed by you, right? That's his real heir." Ha ha. How was that old guy's expression at that time? Wasn't it very exciting? The situation in your family is really complicated, isn't it? Qi Yuan seemed to be talking to himself. It's the same for everyone, right? There's always something that makes people unhappy. Huaisha didn't answer. "Actually, I should thank you. If it weren't for you, I would have gone crazy now, right?" Qi Yuan's voice was hoarse. "I wanted to kill him. I tried everything I could think of, but I didn't even know how to hold a knife. In the end, I was completely regarded as a joke." Huaisha shook his head. "I'm sorry, I don't know what to say. You don't have to answer. I just want to find someone to talk to. I'm sorry to disturb you. Please continue to play the zither." He violently hung up the phone and sat down on the chair in the temporary frontline command center. He pointed at his subordinates one by one. "Do it. You hear me? Even if you can't kill them, do it. Set up the things in the warehouse one by one. I don't want this year's budget, but I want to kill these scourges here. You understand? Therefore, rockets, howitzers, machine guns, and even a few tanks started to be deployed amidst the rumbling sound. If Huaisha knew that the heavy firepower of the Special Affairs Division was stored in the military base outside the city, he would definitely regret it. If he could have stolen some rocket launchers, he would not have had to go through so much trouble. AI Qing watched everything calmly. Now, that division chief Fu was there. She did not need to give any orders. She was too lazy to care about these things. As a local member of the Astronomy Society, her responsibility was not to do these things. Instead, she was responsible for monitoring the entire operation and ensuring that this force was used correctly to surround the Xian High base. Sign your name while you're at it. She did not need to wait for long before the door of the carriage was opened. The supporters who came from afar finally caught up with the final battle. One of them was a burly middle-aged man with stubble. He wore a loose military uniform. Under his rolled-up sleeves, the muscles on his arms bulged when he swung his arms. She could vaguely see pieces of burn scars. The other one wore rimless glasses and looked refined. His white shirt was spotless, and he held a suit in his hand. After saluting and greeting Division Chief Fu, the two of them showed their Social Security Bureau IDs to AI Qing. The silent, burly man did not speak, but the skinny man with the rimless glasses introduced them. "Hello, Madam AI Qing. According to the orders of our superiors, we are here to provide support. This is Level 3 Sublimator Jinmu. I am Level 3 Sublimator Shinyu. We are carrying a border relic. If it's convenient for you to move, please sign your name here." It seemed that Shun Yu was already used to dealing with inspectors. In order to avoid trouble and disputes, Shun Yu directly took out the transfer orders and operation orders from the folder and handed them to AI Qing. Of course, she took out a pen and signed her name on the operation permit, confirming the legitimacy of the two's next actions. Then, her mission was half completed. The two supporters looked at each other and felt that they had met an inspector who was easy to talk to. They seemed to have relaxed a little. Chapter 77. They had to be serious about this kind of thing. After all, protecting the Discovery Realm was not like treating someone to a meal. Since it was a military operation, there was naturally the possibility of innocent people being involved. This included the possibility of the returned people holding civilians hostage or other accidents. Sometimes, there would be some very difficult situations to deal with. Therefore, before this, someone needed to vouch for the legitimacy of the operation. Even if there was an accident that caused a mistake or caused damage outside the scope of the operation, as long as it wasn't too excessive or they weren't caught by the inspector, the two of them would naturally be exempted from all criminal responsibility and other troublesome matters. In order to avoid accidents or irreparable losses, and at the same time to give the frontline sublimators the right to act at their own discretion, this kind of bureaucratic procedure had to be followed. Everyone was used to it. However, some inspectors would often make things difficult for them in order to show their authority or avoid responsibility. The more stubborn ones would simply refuse to sign, or wait until the end of the operation to give them face and sign. After Ai Ching signed the document, the two felt a lot more at ease. After handing the document to Director Fu for safekeeping, they sat down and began to understand the situation. The Dragon Horse building was more than 40 meters tall, which was similar to the area of an ordinary shopping mall. The original construction plan was to have 10 floors. The bottom 5 floors would be used as a shopping mall, and the top 5 floors would be used as the most luxurious hotel in the city. However, only 4 of the 5 floors were built, and the investors ran out of money. Since then, the project was scrapped. And now, under the secret operations of the Savior Society, this place had become the nest of the returned people. There were more than 40 members hiding inside, and according to speculation, there were many mutants that they had raised over the years. It was a tough bone to chew. However, now that Jinling had support, the situation was a little easier. At least they would not be helpless when they opened the fast circle to pollute the Discovery Realm. Not to mention, they had military-level firepower. Even though they were limited by the city and couldn't call a long sword to clean the ground, the lethality was still amazing. Now that they had surrounded the people, the reason why they didn't move was to minimize losses to the greatest extent. Now that Jinling's support had arrived, the next move was much more convenient. After confirming that there was no possibility for them to escape, the two sublimators, who had just arrived and hadn't rested for a while, said that they didn't need to rest anymore. They had to act as soon as possible. Jin Mu had the military style in his bones, while Shunyu had the persistence of efficiency and time. The sooner the better. A long delay may lead to trouble. Shunyu looked at her watch and said, "If we can make it, we can go support other places." Okay. After learning about their soul power through the reports, Director Fu thought for a moment, and he picked up the walkie-talkie. Action. Then there was a roar. 10 minutes ago, the deepest part of the Longma building had now turned into a dark, fasting circle. In the center, there was a huge bronze mirror. The mirror was extremely smooth, but it didn't reflect the outside world at all. Instead, it was completely dark. In the endless darkness, one could vaguely see a twisted and huge shadow sitting in the deepest part. Its huge wings seemed to cover the sky and the sun, and all the shadows were intimidated. And on the body that looked like a beast, there were as many as 9 hideous heads. Even though it was difficult to see their faces through the layers of darkness, it was enough to feel the pairs of scarlet eyes in the darkness, overlooking everything in the world. Just in front of the huge bronze mirror, 7 people who came from afar respectfully prostrated on the ground. Following the call of the Lord, Tong Lu Association has come to see you. Spiritual Doctor Association has come to see you. Celestial Treasure Association has come to see you. Hongshi Rinji Association has come to see you. At this moment, in the cities around Xinhai, all the heads of the subordinate organizations of the pure people had gathered here. They brought all their reserves and treasures. The huge shadow in the bronze mirror let out a shrill laugh, and the steel in front of the mirror was twisted into pieces. Then get ready. Everyone, I will give you the delicacies from the abyss. The huge shadow in the darkness announced solemnly, soon, according to the revelation of the Holy God, the lid of the hell cauldron will be opened again. In an instant, the darkness swallowed everything. The first to make a loud noise was the mortar in the surrounding area. After violently evacuating all the irrelevant people within a 1-kilometer radius, this place had turned into a real battlefield. After all, they were facing a threat at the border. If they didn't show the determination and confidence to fight a modern war, the result would be unpredictable. The sublimator suppression force of the Special Affairs Department had long been used to this. At this moment, once Director Fu gave the order, the huge war machine slowly started to move. Thus, a huge siege in the city began. The artillery roared. In an instant, a huge firepower that was enough to raise dozens of dragon horse buildings to the ground fell from the sky, but when it flew dozens of meters around the dragon horse building, its speed suddenly slowed down. A semicircular cover could vaguely be seen above the dragon horse building. It was hard to tell whether it was a long staff or an overly large iron whip. Its length alone was exaggerated to more than 3 meters, close to 4 meters. It was like an antique, covered with rust and traces of time. The surface of the giant bronze iron whip was octagonal, and the turning point had been rubbed until it glowed. Its weight alone reached hundreds of pounds. It was hard to imagine what kind of giant could create such an exaggerated weapon. If it wasn't for Jean Mu's unreasonably muscular body, it was hard to know who else could grab the handle and lift it up. It was a genuine iron whip that was 2 feet long. Against the constantly erupting airwaves and strong winds, Jean Mu casually took off the somewhat cumbersome military uniform on his body, revealing the strong muscles on his upper body, as well as the burn scars on his upper body. Shen Yu, who was assisting at the back, seemed to be happy to explain. She explained to Director Fu and AI Qing, Jean Mu was a firefighter before he ascended. It is said that his achievements are remarkable, and his strength is terrifying. It's just right for him to use this relic. If it were an actuary like me, I wouldn't be able to use it at all. But I don't have the courage to shout out that inexplicable activation code. While moving forward, Jean Mu roared loudly. The muscles all over his body trembled, and his height increased by another 2 feet. The stigmata sleeping in his body was awakened, the 3rd-level metal-type stigmata in the Eastern Xia lineage. Lai. It was a complete physical enhancement type. His entire body seemed to have turned into metal in an instant, and his weight increased by dozens of times. He left one footprint after another on the broken asphalt road. Finally, he walked out of the fasting circle, clenched the iron whip in his hands, and slowly swung it behind his back. He took a deep breath and roared loudly. Did Su Air update today? Jean Mu's inexplicable words echoed in the air. Before they could disperse, the iron whip lit up with a blazing light as if it was burning red. As Jean Mu swung it horizontally, it smashed into the fasting circle. In an instant, there was a roar. The fasting circle shook violently and wailed. What was wrapped in the iron whip was not only a terrifying power that was enough to smash a military fortress with one blow, but also the impact of the laws of the present realm on the border forces. Although the strange iron whip had to shout out inexplicable words when it was used, it was indeed a powerful weapon against the border regions. Jean Mu took a step back, took a deep breath again, and roared loudly. Did Su Air update today? Boom! The fasting circle shook violently again, and huge cracks appeared. As Jean Mu roared again, the iron whip smashed down, and the fasting circle shattered. Countless artillery fire roared and swallowed the entire dragon horse building. Thanks to everyone's help, I have achieved a good result. There was a ceremony for sacrifices, a ceremony for praises, and even a ceremony for eating. So, what kind of ceremony were they planning to hold? The meaning of 10 times of gluttony was obvious. It was referring to the purified people's great hunting and sacrifice. The rancher's favorite was this kind of battle royale, where the food would fight to the death in an enclosed environment. And the final survivor of this sacrifice would be given the title of hunter and the reward of the rancher, becoming the most competitive member of the purified people. The whole process could be understood as you treated the rancher to a good meal, and the rancher generously gave you something good. And the bones of 100 people, she had figured it out over the past few days. It was probably referring to the frequent grave robberies in Exine. In other words, they had collected the bones of 100 people. What was their goal? What was the point? The birds and venomous snakes were unclear. The meaning of the spiritual coffin was simple and straightforward. Any sublimator would understand it. It was a precious item that could provide a sublimator with a resurrection. After all, a sublimator's consciousness was placed in their soul and not their physical body. A normal person might die after their physical body was destroyed, but unless a sublimator's soul was exhausted, they could use something to repair their physical body or simply change to another body to achieve the effect of resurrection. However, this kind of item was rare in the world today. It was so expensive that it was priceless. After all, no one would sell their other life. Dying in the spiritual coffin and resurrecting in hell. That was to say, someone would carry out a resurrection ceremony. Then who was it? Although there was a high probability that it was a purified people, it could not be ruled out that it was someone else. As for the resurrection shadow and the dormant birds behind it, was there a bird-shaped high-grade stigmata among the enemies? There was a high possibility of this, and it could not be ignored so easily. Now it seemed that the purified people intended to gather power through sacrifices and rituals to carry out a resurrection to achieve a certain goal. Then, would this bring any changes to MODU? Even if the speculation was gradually getting closer to reality, it could only be slightly guarded against because there were no details or weaknesses that could be exploited. The so-called prophetic poems were such annoying things. Regardless of whether the author knew what would happen in the future or not, the things they wrote only had one purpose, and that was to never let the readers in the future guess, and also to show off their intelligence and wisdom, AI Chin-cursed. At the scene, there was a new change in the situation. Across the entire Exine city, the Stone Marrow restaurant in the suburbs now welcomed a somewhat reluctant customer. "Hello, your takeout." Outside the iron gate, the delivery man knocked hard on the fence in front of him. He looked worriedly at the gloomy and dilapidated house behind the iron gate, and the house that was full of the atmosphere of a horror movie. He repeatedly shouted several times, but no one responded. Just as he was about to go home, he suddenly heard a hoarse and sharp voice coming from the courtyard. "Put it at the door." His hand trembled, and he almost dropped the pizza box on the ground. Immediately, as if he had just woken up from a dream, he put down the things in his hand, got on his small motorcycle, and ran away. After he disappeared, the crow on the tree slowly flew down. He used an invisible force to pick up the box, turned around, and flew into the house. "Sigh, this small body is really inconvenient. I can't even get takeout." As he sighed, the door of the house opened automatically, revealing the living room inside. In the center of the living room that was cleaned by Huaisher, there was a table filled with all kinds of food, including 3 large bottles of Coca-Cola with the largest capacity, 2 buckets of Colonel's Family Buckets for boxes of chicken nuggets, and 2 boxes of pizza that just arrived. After putting down the pizza, Crow whistled as she sat on the mini sofa that was tailor-made for her. She enjoyed the sumptuous meal of the weekend and enjoyed the live broadcast of the war through the gigantic water mirror. Fight, fight! The crow, who enjoyed watching the drama, cheered for both sides. However, what was shown in the water mirror was not the battle in the Longma building, but the scene thousands of miles away. Like a heavenly eye, it broke through the shackles of the present world and looked down at the many borders that surrounded the present world like complicated bubbles, as well as the almost endless abyss of hell below the borders. The camera swept across the blazing flames of war in dozens of borders and finally fixed on the narrow area between the present world and the border, and the location was the coastal area of Dongsha, the East Sea that was now boiling, compared to the small Xian High City. This was the main war zone between the pure people and the Social Security Bureau. Under layers of mournful white fog, the entire East Sea had almost turned into a cruel hunting ground, where countless huge sea monsters were constantly killing each other. Shrimps ate seaweed, small fish ate shrimps, big fish ate small fish, and monsters swallowed big fish, and then swallowed each other. With the sound of a cold flute, the cruelty of the food chain had descended here. Chapter 79. Under the Shroud of the Fog. In just a few short hours, countless giant fish in the sea had been nurtured into all kinds of monsters. Although in everyone's impression, the rancher was a tyrannical god who treated all things as food, it was undeniable that the rancher's name also represented that he was in charge of a large amount of power related to life. After all, only when one's appetite was fat could one eat without worry. Even if it was just a little bit of rain sprinkled from the blessed land in the distant hell, it had already turned into a terrifying thick fog that shrouded the entire sea. In the thick fog, countless behemoths that were comparable to Godzilla were constantly killing each other, competing to be the winner of this huge predation. Hunting was happening in every corner. In the end, thousands of monsters that were as large as battleships were born from the tens of thousands of hunting grounds. They gathered in one place, and their eyes were filled with the most primitive bestiality and hunger. They kept devouring all the food along the way, following the sound of the shepherd's flute as they moved toward the eastern summer. And just at the border of the sea, a whole row of steel warships had been slowly lined up. Countless soldiers were rushing to work overtime, preparing for an emergency battle. All kinds of fighter jets began to prepare, warm up, and take off in an orderly manner. And just at the rear, in the various desolate areas of the coastal area, ear-piercing sounds rang out in the military bases. Then, deep missile launchers slowly turned on one after another. Countless monsters that represented the predators whistled along the ocean currents in an instant. The first thing that rang out was a thunderclap. Above the clear sky, a thunderbolt suddenly fell from the sky. No one dared to stare at the appearance of this thunderbolt, because those who dared to look directly at it would forever lose their light in the tyrannical and solemn thunderbolt. In an instant, the thunderbolt rose out of thin air, like a dragon moving in the sky. It stretched for thousands of miles, constantly sprinkling destructive branches on the mortal world. Wherever it passed, the thick fog that came from the purified people was destroyed. Those huge and tyrannical sea beasts were like thin paper in front of the thunderbolt, instantly torn into pieces, and then burned into charred paste in the high temperature. In the end, they really melted into the sea like pieces of paper, turning into a puddle of smelly burnt mud. Like an iron plow turning the earth, the thunderbolt was solid, stretching from north to west for thousands of miles, leaving a scar that was dozens of meters deep on the sea surface. And the thunderbolt that spread from both sides of the crack was dozens of miles away in an instant. Here, the boundary was drawn. With one strike, the casualties were heavy, and the Ascended who released the thunderbolt did not even show his face. But with the death of one sea beast, 10 more sea beasts expanded and grew again under the growth of the fog. Under the whip of the thunderbolt, the monsters only paused for a moment, then regrouped in the sound of the flute and charged toward the country's border. The thunderbolt was like a bugle call for war. At that moment, whether it was the main cannon or the secondary cannon, not to mention the machine guns, torpedoes, and deep-sea bombs, all the warships opened fire. On the aircraft carriers overtime, the fighter jets soared into the sky like birds roaring as they pounced toward the fog. In midair, the missile flew out with a blazing tail flame. Not only here, but at this moment, in all the launch bases along the coast, as if they were welcoming the spring festival, fireworks of war rose into the sky and pounced on the battlefield. This was a war in every sense of the word, a war between the East Xia Social Security Bureau and the people of the purified people under the attention of the whole world. No one doubted the outcome of this war. As a behemoth that controlled 1/10 of the Astronomical Association's power, East Xia, one of the P5, had many years of war reserves and many ascended people. Would they not be able to defeat this group of lunatics like the purified people? There was no need for those private giants, no need for Taiching Heavy Industries, no need for the Giant Goose Group, and no need for all kinds of border hunters. Just relying on the Social Security Bureau was enough to completely assess this disaster. The only uncertain thing was, how long could the purified people last under such terrifying firepower? Would it be enough to achieve their goal? Rome, Egypt, the American Freedom Alliance, the Russian Federation, and even Yingzhou, which was closest to the battlefield. At this moment, countless eyes were fixed on the battlefield, speculating about the next changes in this battle. Of course, there was also a crow who was gloating and watching the show. Amazing, awesome. The crow sucked in big mouthfuls of Coca-Cola next to it and burped heartily. It threw the chicken pieces dipped in sauce into its mouth. It was impossible to see how the bird's beak ate such a large piece of chicken without even chewing. It kept cheering, "Hit him, hit him, burn his whole family, hit his mother." They had no idea which side this guy was on. However, the war still started abruptly and logically. When looking down from a huge perspective, everything seemed to have become distant. They could not see the casualties and tragic scenes. It was as if the light of steel and the color of sea monsters collided, strangling each other. Little bits of light kept falling from the sky, igniting a grand bonfire on the sea. The steel birds flying back and forth fought with the mutated birds in the sky, and then they kept falling into the sea where the killing and fighting were the most intense. The huge warships kept bursting out roars, shaking the sea and creating layers of huge waves. Then, the giant sea monsters in the sea jumped up, opened their bloody mouths, and bit the entire warship in half. At first glance, it seemed that the purified people had the upper hand. The fog seemed to cover the sea area endlessly, constantly giving birth to new sea monsters. But until now, except for the beginning, there were no traces of the purified people in Dongsha. They only relied on the rules of the present realm and the huge steel torrent to forcibly stop this group of monsters from the border outside the country's borders. Even so, it was so tragic. However, not a single sea beast managed to cross that sacred boundary. Any sea monster that tried to go around the front of the battlefield to steal the chicken was chased by the crazy warships. The crazy cannons were fired until this group of beasts was completely turned into a pile of debris. And under the constant fire, the fog finally could not continue, revealing the shadow hidden behind the countless sea monsters. That's right, it was a shadow floating on the sea. No matter how they observed, they could not find any corresponding objects above and below the shadow. It was as if it had appeared out of thin air. It existed on the surface of the sea, revealing its outline with the undulation of the waves. It was like a huge fish that was as big as an island. In the middle of the shadow, like a whale, there was a huge hole constantly spitting out rain from the paradise. And on the head of the giant fish shadow, countless dense tentacles stretched out. Those dim tentacles were constantly dancing, as if they were lashing the boundary of the present realm from a distance, making a sharp flute sound. It was hard to tell what it was. There had never been such a strange substance in the present realm. In fact, it was not a substance, but a border that was moving close to the present realm. That independent border was like a bubble sticking to the surface of the present realm. Countless tentacles pulled countless sea monsters, ordering them to move forward. With the endless number of sea monsters pulling the carriage for itself, it slowly moved closer to the eastern summer border. But at the same time, it seemed to be alive. Majestic and gloomy waves of origin substance spread out from the shadow. After losing the cover of the fog, it was as clear as the existence of the scorching sun. A living border. No, it should be a monster that was between a border and an ascendant. This was one of the gifts that the ranch master had scattered to the human world from the paradise. Level 5 stigmata from the main lineage of the Abyss Ranch. Enough to be called the incarnation of miracles, the philosopher's stone, Dagon. The moment the fog dissipated, the shadow quickly twisted and became thin in an instant, as if it was struggling to escape from the edge of the present realm, trying to avoid everyone's observation. But at the same time, a cold laugh sounded from thousands of miles away in the sky. "Why bother?" That low voice said. "You're already here." Thousands of miles away, the sky suddenly shook like a drum. As if the iron curtain was broken, countless cracks appeared in the clear sky. That was the proof that the fragile atmosphere was on the verge of collapse, unable to bear the excessive power. The roar of the sky drum reverberated between the mortal world and smashed into the sea like an iron hammer. It was just the sound. Countless sea monsters were crushed in response. Wherever the sound wave passed, it was like the tide had crushed a sandcastle piled up by sand. The blood of the sea monsters splattered everywhere, dyeing the blue sea water into various disgusting colors. Then, a thunderbolt appeared out of thin air, like the legendary Jianmu falling from the sky, sprinkling electric light that covered the sky and the sun. Everything was shrouded in that electric light. It pierced through the sea and the sky, turning into a hook shape, and was thrown toward Dagon, who had escaped from the present realm. The thunderbolt sank into the sea as if it had entered another world without the slightest electric light leaking out. Then the thunderbolt shook violently, and the shadow in the sea gradually became thin. The thunderbolt was like a hook, and the huge fish had become its prey. As the thunderbolt rose bit by bit, countless electric currents split from the top, violently spread in all directions, smashing all the sea monsters that tried to get close to it into pieces. For a time, countless amounts of blood burst out of the sea, and in the sea, the shadow of the huge fish that was originally thin became clear again, even if its struggling posture was unwilling and furious. "Give me up." A hoarse roar like thunder exploded in the sky. At that moment, the sea surface shattered, and a mountain-like silhouette was pulled by the thunderbolt, splitting the waves from the sea and completely falling into the present realm. The waves were monstrous. The moment the sublimator who had turned into Dagon appeared, he tried to open up his divine mark and mutate the entire sea. But then a series of thunderbolts fell from the sky like railings, piercing deep into the depths of the sea. From the surface of the huge sea, the thunderbolts connected with each other, forming a cage that was enough to seal the mountain-like giant fish. Above Dagon's back, a slender and thin figure slowly emerged, raising her beautiful face to the sky. The originally charming and compassionate maternal face was now full of chilling ferocity and viciousness, a furious roar. Then, the seven seas trembled. It was a tool to maintain the existence of the present realm and explore the depths of hell. His goal from the very beginning was to transform himself from an ordinary being step by step until he approached the level of God. However, this process wasn't gentle, nor was it comfortable. Instead, it required one to face a violent transformation and a terrible price. So long as one took a wrong step, there would be the danger of falling into the abyss. After all, from the moment they became transcendents, The Ascendants had become existences that replaced the gods. They were an indispensable link in this world, and it would not be an exaggeration to call them the chosen. To this day, the Astronomy Society was still analyzing the heritage of the gods, expanding the depths of hell, and improving the system by relying on the 16 pillars that supported the present realm. Aside from the various nicknames, the Astronomy Society would simply and crudely use the ranks in alchemy to name the stages of the stigmata. The first stage was Mercury, the second stage was Gold, the third stage was Ether, the fourth stage was Star's Nest, the fifth stage was Philosopher's Stone, and even the crown at the top and the natural enemy who broke through this limit and became the incarnation of the gods. It seemed simple, but in fact, it was like groping forward in the dark. Through the most basic stigmata, the Ascendants followed the complicated and hidden roadmap, as if they were climbing up, constantly retrieving and searching for miracles and all kinds of strange things in the abyss. They used it to accumulate and transform, hoping to finally advance to the end of the road, the peak of all things, the place where the gods were. There were too many unknowns and dangers. Even the slightest change would lead to unpredictable results. Not being able to advance was only the lightest punishment. Falling directly into hell and being contaminated as a corrosive and solidified was the most common outcome. Didn't the leading organization of the Astronomy Society in the past, Utopia, not lead to the later division and degeneration because of the careless exploration of this power? Although it was unknown what kind of price was paid for such a crude change, to be able to succeed, it must have been an unimaginable hardship and luck that could not be replicated. Now, with a single blow, Fu Tsangguang forcefully pulled Dagon to the border. Then, he drew a circle on the ground and forcibly imprisoned it. Then, the moment Dagon was exposed, the surrounding thick fog suddenly distorted and tore apart. Countless faint figures appeared on the sea and ran toward it. It was almost possible to distinguish all the common and uncommon weapons, cold weapons, hot weapons, and even all kinds of relics of the border. 100,000 people stepped on the solidified waves and rushed toward Dagon. The number of people was not an exaggeration in the ordinary sense. It was 100,000 people, 100,000 ascendants with the same face: attack, defense, shackle, attack, excavation. In an instant, a dazzling work appeared from the 100,000 people who cooperated with each other as if they were one person. Even though there were countless casualties under Dagon's fierce struggle, more figures immediately split and joined the heated battle and work. Quantity, pure quantity. Even the endless sea beasts could not resist 100,000 times the efficiency and 100,000 times the output. Or stay strong. The clouds are me. It was another stage 5 ascendant from Dongxia, Yan Qingga. If it was only one person, there was nothing to be afraid of. If there were only 100,000 people, there was nothing to be worried about. However, if these 100,000 people were all armed to the teeth with relics of the border and mass-produced weapons, and they cooperated with each other like one person, then there would be terrible consequences. They were not afraid of sacrifice. They were not afraid of death. Even if more than half of them were wiped out in an instant, there would be new figures who would pick up the equipment of the dead and arm themselves, and then rush to the front line again without fear of death. No, he was not fighting. The fighting was naturally handled by Fu Tsangguang. What he was doing was building. No, it should be said that he was building for destruction. It was like assembling a siege vehicle in front of the enemy. 100,000 peasants began to build arrow towers against the wall of the purified people. With this terrifying manpower and speed, countless huge instruments were carried on Dagon's body and were quickly riveted and welded. Then, with the endless flow of electricity, a strange light glowed. Although it was impossible to tell what it was definitely not a Wi-Fi signal. The purified people hiding in the border finally could not wait for the situation to worsen. White figures flew out of Dagon's whale-like blowhole, spread their wings, and the halo above their heads rose. There was no doubt that they were the solidified people hiding in the blessed land, known as the hunting angels, who were known as the rancher's knife and fork. There was no doubt that divine power was operating on their spread wings at this moment. The fanatical hunting angels chanted hymns, gathered into an army, and raised their weapons towards the Chilin in the sky. A four-edged flame sword extended from the void, still spinning on its own, stirring up the wind and clouds, and colliding with the lightning. It was so huge that it could hold up the gap between the sky and the earth. The flame sword and the lightning shook the sky endlessly, and under the counterattack of countless sea beasts, and the purified people, Yen Qinga finally completed his work. "I'm done." Hundreds of figures worked together and connected the last cable. They turned around and roared. At that moment, the power from the void flowed from the machine, and the power of the great mystic Zarathustra was exerted on Dagon, completely fixing it in place. No, it was frozen in the sea. The mission was completed. Yen Qinga heaved a sigh of relief, and then heard a hoarse roar behind him. The purified people's counterattack had begun. "Old Fu! Old Fu!" Yen Qinga subconsciously called for help, and then found in despair that Fu Tsangguang was resisting the rancher's god's sword of retribution and had no time to care about anything else. He had to do it himself. The 100,000 figures were awkwardly suppressing the purified people, who were rushing forward. When the other side began to fight with all their might, Yen Qinga was in an extremely difficult situation and could only rely on the advantage of numbers to tangle with the other side, pulling hair, stepping on toes, raising weapons, stabbing eyes. 100,000 bruised and swollen faces looked up at the sky and shouted, "Little White, if you don't come, I'll die." I'm coming." As the white pigeons circled, no figures appeared. F*CK, I'm really going to die. My eyes, F*CK. You bastard, where are you kicking? Behind him, it had already become a fight with the purified people. "I'm really going to die. How much longer do you need?" Soon. White Emperor's son's hurried voice sounded from the void. Just a moment. Yen Qinga could only vomit blood in grief and anger. 100,000 of himself meant 100,000 ways to die, and the ability to infinitely split also infinitely weakened his fighting power. But in order to maintain the integrity of the machine behind him, he could not slack off and had to build this dam with himself. Just as he was about to break down, a short and slender figure finally fell from the sky and fell into the sea in a sorry state. Her wet cheeks surfaced. "I'm lost again." The young girl shouted and complained. "How many times have I told you that border transit is not accurate at all? You just don't want to change. Take the car. Can't you just take the car?" Yen Qinga was about to explode with anger. "Hurry up and help. I can't hold on much longer." Thus, White Emperor's son stretched out his hand and drew a line in the void. The group of purified people who were playing with each other among the 100,000 doppelgangers instantly split into pieces, and blood did not even have time to gush out before they were cut into pieces and turned into dust. Yen Qinga was dumbfounded. "Just you? I don't know." The young girl climbed out of the sea in a sorry state and hurriedly wiped the water from her hair, her face blank. "I was afraid of getting lost, so I left at 3:30 and ran for a few hours. Could it be that I've left them behind? Where did you go?" Yen Qinga raised his wrist in despair and showed her his watch. "It's only 3:29. Chapter 81. Just as everyone stared blankly, the mighty rainbow formed by the torrent of source form completely pierced through Dagon's body, and then broke into the border. Then Using this as a springboard, it pointed to the blessed paradise. In an instant, the rainbow turned into a bridge. Using the connection between Dagon and the rancher, it forcibly opened up the coordinates of the blessed paradise, and then built a road. Since the start of the war, the ascendants who had been waiting until now appeared on the bridge. Countless figures flew across the rainbow bridge and rushed straight to the blessed paradise at the end of the rainbow. The surprise attack had begun. At this moment, not only on this sea, but also on various coastal cities, large and small battles between the purified people and the Social Security Bureau were unfolding. But even if they had the upper hand, it still could not solve any problems. Passively defending could only passively wait for the enemy to make a move. Rather than that, it was better to attack the enemy directly, break into the blessed paradise. Okay, I should go too. The little girl called the White Emperor's Child shook off the water on her body and raised her arm to catch the pigeons falling from the sky. She waved at Yenchinga handsomely. "I'll be back soon." After that, she turned back and jumped into the rainbow behind her, disappearing among the many figures. "Don't get lost." Yenchinga poked his head out and shouted worriedly, not knowing if she heard him. Even when she was in the present realm, she was still able to jump around for several hours in an unknown place where time and space were distorted. To be lost to such an extent was already shocking enough to make ghosts and gods weep. But it was better if she got lost before. At most, she would only mumble a few times, and it would not delay anything. If she got lost in the blessed paradise, then it would really be over. But she would not go that far, right? In Xian Hai, the rumbling had come to an end. In the place where the Dragon Horse Plaza used to be, there was now only a ruin left. Among the broken walls, countless corpses of border mutants were scattered in the dust and mud. Fresh blood of various colors mixed together, emitting a foul smell. The last remaining fanatics seemed to have given up hope of breaking out. Under the guidance of the old priest, they surrounded the huge broken bronze mirror and prayed fervently. They did not care about the suppression force behind them. The sound of praying became louder and louder until gunshots rang out. The priest, who had been standing in front of the bronze mirror for a long time, fell on his back. There was a bloody wound in his chest, and blood was gushing out of his mouth. Director Fu changed the magazine expressionlessly and kicked away the screaming fanatic in front of him. He lowered his head and looked at the twisted face. Even though the fanatic was dying, his lips were still open as he prayed with difficulty. Director Fu sneered. "Now that things have come to this, are you still hoping for a miracle from your Shang deity? Miracles are everywhere. What a coincidence." Director Fu said indifferently, "I have a miracle for you too, and it's a 125mm caliber one." Behind him, the sound of steel rolling over cement rang out. Amidst the loud rumbling, the huge tank drove into the ruins. The black muzzle slowly turned around and aimed at the remaining group of lunatics. Director Fu turned around indifferently and waved his hand. "Send these bastards to heaven. You will regret for what you have done." In the pool of blood, the priest's face became twisted and venomous. "Soon, you will see the arrival of the Almighty Holy Spirit with your own eyes." Boom! After the sound of the cannon, there was nothing left. "It's finally over." Director Fu touched his pocket and took out his cigarette box and a nicotine patch. After thinking for a while, he threw the nicotine patch aside and reached for the cigarette box. "Forget it. Let's celebrate. Just one, just one." Just as he lit the cigarette and blew out a puff of smoke, he saw a black fog gradually rising in the distant sky. In the northeast, he was stunned for a moment and subconsciously calculated the distance. It seems about the same as the position of the Special Affairs Department. Amidst his astonishment, streams of smoke rose up from the ground one after another. They were like pitch-black pillars, and even the strong winds were unable to blow them away. They propped up the space between the sky and the earth, drawing the entire city in step by step. Ai Ching, who was beside him, looked up at the sky. So this is the meaning of a ritual. They heard screams coming from behind them. A large amount of thick smoke spewed out of the broken bronze mirror. The terrifying concentration of the abyss precipitated in an instant, corroding the surrounding people into strange shapes. Before the smoke had time to spread, a gunshot rang out from Ai Ching, shattering the bronze mirror into pieces. But soon, countless scattered pieces of copper gathered out of thin air, and thick smoke rose again. The mutated people seemed to be pulled by the smoke, screaming as they were swallowed into the bronze mirror. At that moment, a dagger flew out from Ai Ching's hand, emitting a golden light in midair, leaving a straight trace. The dagger was nailed into the bronze mirror, pouring the endless light contained in the dagger into it, illuminating the fragmented world and the bloody scene that looked like hell. It was as if the sun had appeared out of thin air. The border relic that once severely injured Faust suddenly shattered at this moment. Then, the condensed light recklessly refracted and collided with the fragments of the mirror. Finally, it gathered in one place and exploded. The bronze mirror suspended in midair shook violently, turned red, and quickly melted. Copper liquid fell like raindrops, and then it fell apart. At the last moment, an inhuman roar of anger rang out, as if a feast had been interrupted. A huge, strange palm forcibly stretched out from it, causing the surrounding scene to crack like a broken mirror. In the blink of an eye, the world spun and everything disappeared as if it was an illusion. When Director Fu came to his senses, he subconsciously looked to the side. But there was no one in the wheelchair beside him. Ai Ching had disappeared without a trace, along with the other two ascendants. Half an hour ago, in the prison on the second basement of the Special Affairs Division. As the light of a summoning animation lit up on the phone screen, impassioned music began to play. SSR, SSR, SSR. Huaisher stared at the screen with wide eyes and shouted with anticipation. That's right, Huaisher also got his phone. Not only was he connected to the Wi-Fi here, but he was also lying in bed playing mobile games all day long, as if it was his own home. Moreover, after he had money, he became bolder. After thinking for a night, he gritted his teeth and charged 30 yuan into the game. For the first time in his life, he became a monthly card user. Not to mention anything else, he instantly felt like he was noble. It was different from before. Now, he looked at free players as if they were little eunuchs who were studying with him. After floating for a long time and finally calming down, it was time for the exciting card draw. The stock that he had accumulated during this period of time, and the 20 stones that the monthly card gave him every day, added together, he could draw 10 consecutive draws. In the last few minutes before the end of the White Emperor's card pool, Huaisher resolutely pressed the button for the 10th draw. Then, in the constantly flickering light, his smile gradually disappeared. As he drew again and again, his last hope disappeared in the blue sky of Africa. Why is this happening? He collapsed on the bed powerlessly. As the countdown ended, he said goodbye to the White Emperor card in the pool forever. He was speechless. You're the only card I want. JPG. While the fat otaku was crying, he suddenly heard footsteps from the stairs. A serious-looking prison guard walked downstairs with 2 armed guards. They went straight to Huaisher's cell next door. Chi-Yuan, let's go. The unfamiliar prison guard knocked on the bars of the cell with a baton and urged loudly. Huaisher, who was lying on the bed, raised his head in shock and looked at them. He frowned. He smelled a familiar scent from the 2 guards and the prison guard. The smell of blood. "Isn't Oldley on duty today?" He asked casually, but he didn't get an answer. Instead, he felt a cold, murderous intent coming from the two armed guards. He paused for a second, sighed, and threw his phone away. "I originally wanted to sit in prison peacefully." When the phone spun in the air, the boy who was paralyzed on the bed had already bounced up from the broken bedboard, dodging the blazing bullets that followed closely behind. Then, the burning palm spun in the air and threw an invisible axe at the guard. The axe blade whistled through the air and directly chopped the palm that pulled the trigger. Then, the gray rope extended, wrapped around the barrel, and suddenly pulled back. Huaisher landed on the ground, caught the submachine gun in his hand, and pulled the trigger at the guard who was empty-handed. The head exploded. Then he clenched his fist and turned it into ashes, but no thick smoke appeared. He awkwardly found that his recent days were peaceful and comfortable. He slept and ate. He could also play mobile games every day in prison. It was difficult to accumulate any negative energy. Unknowingly, his negative energy machine had been worn away by the comfortable prison life. The life of a fat otaku was terrifying. He could only awkwardly dodge the other guards aiming and shooting. He hurriedly threw the rope. The rope flew out like a snake and wrapped around the guard's body. In an instant, he was tied up like a dumpling. Huaisher took out the axe and slashed at the railing. In the roar of the metal collision, he kicked off a section of the railing and squeezed out of the cage. He looked at the cell next to him. He was afraid that Chi Yuan would be silenced in just a few seconds. But the expected bloody scene did not happen. Behind the open cell door, the originally majestic prison guard was now devoutly prostrating at Chi Yuan's feet. He raised his hands high and offered a dark wine. "You're here?" Chi Yuan looked up at him, but his face was completely different from what Huaisher imagined. He was scarily thin. Only his eyes were bloodshot, as if he had struggled in a nightmare for a long time. "Well, you can send me off." He held the small wine jug in his hand and grinned at Huaisher. He raised his head and drank it in one gulp. Huaisher couldn't stop him. He subconsciously reached out to pull the rope to pull the wine jug back, but he felt a terrifying wave of air sweep over. It was as if a bomb had exploded from Chi Yuan's body. You're tuning into the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.